The cruelest thing about betrayal is that it rarely comes from strangers. I understood that sentence the moment I arrived at my granddaughter Sophie's wedding carrying a gold envelope with a $75,000 cashier's check inside. The wedding venue sat on a hillside in Napa Valley, overlooking rows of vineyards glowing under the California sunset. White roses lined the stone walkway. Crystal chandeliers shimmered through the ballroom windows. A string quartet played softly near the fountain while guests in designer dresses laughed with champagne glasses in their hands. Everyone kept saying the same thing as I walked past them. This wedding is absolutely breathtaking. It looks like something out of a movie. Sophie is so lucky. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. And every single compliment felt personal to me because I had paid for almost all of it. The venue alone had cost more than my first house back in Ohio. The floral arrangements were flown in from Oregon. The custom wedding cake stood nearly 6 feet tall. The imported champagne had come directly from France. I knew every number because every invoice had passed through my hands. My late husband Walter used to say I spoiled people with my heart before my wallet ever opened. Maybe he was right. After Walter died 3 years earlier, Sophie became the center of my world. She was my only granddaughter. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the same dimple Walter had when he smiled. When she was little, she used to climb into my lap and say, "Grandma Eleanor, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a mansion." Back then, I believed love stayed pure forever. I was 68 years old now, living alone in the large Connecticut home Walter and I bought 40 years earlier. The silence inside that house could feel unbearable some nights. So when Sophie got engaged, I poured myself into helping create her perfect wedding. At first, it started small. A contribution toward the dress. Then help with the venue. Then the catering. Then the honeymoon villa in Lake Como. Every time another expense appeared, Melissa, my daughter-in-law, would place a gentle hand on my arm and say, "You're the only reason this dream wedding is even possible." I told myself I was doing it out of love. Maybe I was also trying to buy my way into feeling needed again. The valet opened my car door as I stepped out holding the gold envelope tightly against my chest. "Welcome to the Whitmore Brooks wedding," he said with a smile. I smiled back and adjusted my pearl necklace. Walter had given it to me on our 30th anniversary. I still wore it whenever I needed to feel strong. Inside the ballroom lobby, wedding staff hurried across marble floors carrying trays of cocktails while guests gathered around an enormous flower wall taking photos. Everything looked elegant. Expensive. Perfect. Exactly how Melissa wanted it. My son Richard spotted me near the entrance. "Hey Mom," he said quickly, kissing my cheek without slowing down. His tuxedo looked rushed, slightly wrinkled near the shoulders. "You made it." "Of course I made it," I said softly. "I wouldn't miss Sophie's wedding for anything." He nodded distractedly while checking his phone. "Melissa's been stressed all day. Try not to take anything personally if she seems tense." That sentence landed strangely in my stomach. Try not to take anything personally. Before I could ask what he meant, he disappeared toward the ballroom. I stood there alone for a moment listening to laughter echo beneath the chandeliers. Then Melissa approached me wearing a silver satin gown so tight she walked carefully in tiny steps. Her blonde curls were sprayed into place perfectly. "Eleanor," she said with exaggerated warmth. "Thank God you're here." She air-kissed my cheek without actually touching me. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I replied. "Everything turned out beautifully." "Well," she laughed lightly, "when you spend this much money, it better." Something about the way she said it made my smile tighten slightly. But before I could respond, her attention shifted to another guest walking by. "Oh my God, Senator Bailey made it," she whispered excitedly before hurrying away. I watched her disappear into the crowd and suddenly felt older than I had all year. The wedding coordinator eventually directed guests toward the ballroom for seating. I moved slowly through rows of decorated tables covered in ivory linens and gold candles. Each table had elegant handwritten place cards resting beside crystal wine glasses. Table 3. That was where I was seated. Close to the dance floor. Close to family. Exactly where I expected to be. I smiled faintly as I approached my chair. Then I saw the card. At first, my brain refused to process the words. I actually thought I was misreading them. The old lady paying for everything. My hands froze around the gold envelope. The sounds in the ballroom seemed distant all at once, like someone had lowered the volume of the world around me. I stared at the card again. Same elegant calligraphy as everyone else's place cards. Same gold trim. Same creamy cardstock. Only this one carried humiliation instead of a name. A young couple seated nearby looked at me awkwardly before quickly glancing away. That was when I realized they had already seen it. Heat rose into my face. My chest tightened painfully beneath my silk dress. I looked around the ballroom and suddenly every laugh sounded sharper. Every whisper felt directed at me. Then I noticed a bridesmaid at the next table hiding a smile behind her champagne glass. Another guest quickly lowered his phone after looking in my direction. Someone had probably already taken pictures of it. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the card. I kept waiting for somebody to rush over and apologize. A printing mistake. A cruel prank by one immature guest. Something. But nobody came. And deep down, before anyone said a word, I already knew the truth. This wasn't an accident. By the following Sunday, the entire family had learned about the trust. Not because I announced it. Not because I wanted revenge. But because people like Vanessa could never stay quiet when they realized they had lost something they believed already belonged to them. My phone began buzzing before 8 in the morning. First came my younger sister Diane from Phoenix. Then my niece Kelly from Minneapolis. Then 2 women from church I had not spoken to in months. Every conversation started the same way. Margaret, what happened at the dinner? Or, Vanessa seems very upset. Or my personal favorite, I am sure this is all just a misunderstanding. That word. Misunderstanding. Families used it like perfume. Spray enough of it around the truth and suddenly everyone pretended the smell disappeared. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee growing cold while sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor Harold and I had installed 30 years earlier. The same floor Vanessa once called outdated while standing inside my home eating my peach cobbler. I remembered that clearly now. Funny how disrespect became impossible to ignore once your heart finally stopped making excuses for it. Around noon, Daniel finally showed up. He did not call first. He just walked through the side gate and knocked twice before opening the screen door like he still lived there. Old habits survived even when respect did not. I kept folding laundry while he stood awkwardly in the doorway. "Mom," he said carefully. "Can we talk?" I did not answer right away. I folded Harold's old flannel shirt with slow precision before placing it into the basket. "You are already talking," I replied. Daniel sighed heavily. "Vanessa is humiliated." I looked at him then. Not angry. Not emotional. Just tired. Humiliation usually arrives after entitlement gets exposed. He rubbed the back of his neck the same way he used to when he got caught lying as a teenager. "She did not mean what she said." "Which part?" I asked calmly. "The burden part? The which part? Or the part where she discussed my funeral before I am even dead?" His face tightened. "Mom, please." "No," I said softly. "You do not get to say please now. Please belonged back at that dinner table while your wife spoke about me like unwanted furniture." He looked down at the floor. Silence filled the kitchen for several seconds. Then he said the sentence I think he had rehearsed the entire drive over. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. "Daniel," I said quietly, "when a woman spends years swallowing disrespect to keep peace in the family, people become shocked the moment she finally speaks. He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand gently. Let me finish. My voice remained calm, but inside me something had finally hardened into certainty. For 12 years, I gave your wife kindness she never returned. I ignored comments. I ignored insults disguised as jokes. I ignored being excluded from holidays I paid for. I ignored the way she corrected me in my own kitchen like I was some confused old woman who needed supervision. He shifted uncomfortably. It was not like that. It was exactly like that, I replied. And the worst part is not her behavior. It is yours. That landed. I saw it immediately in his eyes. You watched it happen, I continued. Every single time. And every single time, you chose comfort over courage. He sat down slowly at the table across from me. For the first time since Harold died, my son looked smaller than I remembered. Older too. Not physically. Spiritually. Like life had been quietly sanding away pieces of him year after year. I did not know what to do, he admitted. I nodded once. That is true. Because you spent so many years trying to avoid conflict that you forgot avoiding conflict sometimes creates betrayal. He stared at his hands. Vanessa thought the house would eventually go to us. Of course she did, I said. Because somewhere along the line, generosity stopped being seen as love and started being seen as a future transaction. The room grew quiet again. Outside, wind moved through the oak trees Harold planted when Daniel was 7 years old. I could still picture my husband digging those holes himself during one brutally hot July while Daniel handed him tools and complained about mosquitoes every 5 minutes. Back then, my son used to protect things he loved. Somewhere along the way, that instinct disappeared. So what happens now? He asked finally. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Now? I repeated. Now I live the rest of my life without fear of being emotionally evicted from my own family. He looked up quickly. I could tell he wanted me to soften. Mothers usually did. That was the trap. Children learned eventually that if they waited long enough, mothers often apologized for the pain done to them. But something inside me had changed after that dinner. Maybe grief had finally burned away my guilt. Maybe age had. Or maybe I was simply exhausted from begging silently for respect I should have received freely. The trust stays exactly as it is, I said. The house will become a women's transitional home after I am gone. Harold would have wanted that. Daniel frowned slightly. You never talked to me about that. You never asked me what mattered to me anymore, I answered gently. That one hurt him. I could see it immediately. Good. Not because I wanted revenge. But because truth should weigh something when it finally lands. He stayed another 20 minutes. Mostly quiet. Before leaving, he stood near the front door awkwardly, like a stranger unsure whether he still belonged there. Vanessa thinks you hate her, he said softly. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, I said. I simply see her clearly now. After he left, I sat alone in the silence again. But this time, the silence felt different. Cleaner somehow. Like opening windows after years of stale air. Around 4 that afternoon, my neighbor Lorraine came over carrying lemon bars and enough curiosity to fuel a courtroom trial. Word travels fast around here, she announced before I even opened the container. I laughed for the first time all week. A real laugh. Short, surprised, rusty from lack of use. Lorraine settled into the chair across from me and lowered her voice dramatically. Did Vanessa really call you a burden? Close enough, I replied. Lorraine shook her head slowly. Honey, some people only value older women when they need free childcare or a holiday casserole. Or an inheritance, I added dryly. We both laughed then. But later that evening, after Lorraine left and darkness settled across the backyard, I stood alone at the kitchen sink staring out toward Harold's garden. The tomatoes had started growing wild again. He always loved that. Said nature did its best work when nobody controlled it too tightly. I thought about that while rinsing dishes. Maybe people were the same way. Maybe I had spent too many years trimming myself down to fit inside other people's comfort. Softer opinions. Smaller needs. Quieter pain. Easier presence. And maybe the reason Vanessa hated me so much now was because I had finally stopped shrinking. I dried my hands slowly and looked around the kitchen. My kitchen. The walls Harold painted. The cabinets we saved for years to afford. The clock above the stove ticking steadily through another evening. For the first time in a very long time, this house no longer felt like something I needed permission to occupy. It felt like mine again. Tuesday morning arrived with heavy rain and the kind of gray sky that made the whole neighborhood feel quieter than usual. I stood near the living room window holding a cup of cinnamon tea while water slid slowly down the glass. Harold always loved rainy mornings. Said they forced people to slow down long enough to hear themselves think. Back then I used to laugh at comments like that. Now I understood exactly what he meant. The phone had finally stopped ringing every hour. The gossip had settled into that familiar suburban rhythm where people pretended concern while secretly enjoying the drama. But underneath the silence, I could feel something shifting inside the family. Not healing. Repositioning. Like everyone was quietly deciding which version of the story benefited them most. Around 10 o'clock, my granddaughter Emma called. Her voice sounded hesitant. Grandma? Good morning, sweetheart. Mom is upset again. Of course she was. Vanessa treated inconvenience like personal persecution. What happened now? I asked gently. Emma paused. She says you turned the whole family against her. I closed my eyes briefly. Poor child. 16 years old and already learning how adults handed emotional burdens to children when they lacked the maturity to carry them themselves. Emma, I said softly, none of this is your responsibility. I know, she whispered. But she did not sound convinced. I moved slowly toward the kitchen table and sat down. How are you doing? Another pause. Then quietly, honestly? Always honestly with me. I am embarrassed. That hurt more than anything Vanessa had said at dinner. Because Emma carried kindness naturally. Shame did not belong in that child's heart. Listen to me carefully, I said. Adults make choices. Sometimes selfish ones. But none of that changes who you are. Mom says families should support each other no matter what. I almost smiled at the irony. People who demanded unconditional loyalty rarely practiced unconditional kindness. Support is not the same thing as surrender, I answered calmly. And respect matters in families too. Emma stayed quiet for a second before speaking again. Dad has been sleeping on the couch. Well. There it was. Cracks spreading beneath the polished surface. I should not have felt satisfaction. But after years of being treated like background furniture in my own family, I could not deny a small part of me noticed the timing. Disrespect often seemed harmless until consequences arrived. Your father loves you very much, I told her carefully. Do not let adult problems make you question that. I know, she said softly. I just miss how things used to feel. After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes staring at the rain outside. That sentence stayed with me. I miss how things used to feel. The truth was, I missed it too. Not the fake politeness. Not the exhausting peacekeeping. But the version of family I believed we were before reality exposed itself. There was grief in that. Real grief. Not just for Harold. But for illusions. Around lunchtime, I drove to the grocery store for the first time since the dinner. The moment I walked through the automatic doors, I knew people had talked. Two cashiers glanced at each other near the floral section. An older man from church suddenly became fascinated with canned soup when he spotted me near produce. Small towns never needed newspapers. Women over 50 carried information faster than the internet. I kept shopping anyway. Roma tomatoes. Wheat bread. Half-gallon of milk. Ground coffee. Ordinary things. There was power in ordinary things after chaos. Near the frozen foods aisle, I heard heels clicking sharply behind me. Vanessa. Of course. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the rain and carried herself with the rigid posture of someone performing confidence instead of feeling it. For one brief second, neither of us spoke. Then she crossed her arms tightly. You really enjoyed humiliating me, did you not? Her voice stayed low, but venom slid underneath every word. I placed a carton of eggs carefully into my cart before answering. No, Vanessa. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own behavior. She let out a short bitter laugh. You made me look greedy. I did not make you anything. Her jaw tightened immediately. People hated mirrors when they finally reflected truth instead of fantasy. Daniel is miserable, she snapped. Emma barely talks to me now. I looked at her quietly for a moment. Underneath the expensive coat and perfect makeup, she looked exhausted. Not guilty. Exhausted. There was a difference. Then perhaps this would be a good time for reflection, I said calmly. Do not patronize me. I am not. I rested both hands lightly on the shopping cart. But I will say this. You spent years treating love like leverage. Eventually people notice. Her face flushed red beneath the fluorescent lights. You always judged me. That surprised me. No, I replied honestly. I underestimated you. That landed harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa stared at me for several seconds, probably waiting for me to soften the blow with motherly reassurance. But I had finally learned something important. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. She stepped closer. You think you won? I almost felt sad hearing that question. Because only people ruled by pride believed every disagreement required a winner and loser. This was never a competition, I answered quietly. I wanted a family. You wanted control. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time since I had known her, Vanessa looked uncertain. Not angry. Not polished. Just uncertain. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away toward the checkout lanes, heels striking the tile floor in sharp uneven rhythms. I stood there a moment longer beside the frozen vegetables feeling strangely calm. Not triumphant. Just free. When I returned home later that afternoon, there was an envelope sitting inside my mailbox. No stamp. Hand-delivered. My stomach tightened slightly as I opened it in the kitchen. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. Daniel's handwriting. Mom, I know things cannot go back to normal. Maybe they should not. But I need you to know something. Dad would be disappointed in me. I see that now. I kept trying to keep peace inside my marriage while ignoring what it was costing everyone else. Especially you. I do not expect forgiveness overnight. I just hope someday you believe I am trying to become better than this. Love, Daniel. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. Not because it fixed anything. It did not. But because accountability sounded unfamiliar after so many years of excuses. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Evening sunlight pushed through the clouds, washing the backyard in soft gold. I walked slowly onto the porch holding Daniel's letter against my chest. Harold used to say storms revealed weaknesses people ignored during good weather. Roof leaks. Rotting wood. Cracked foundations. Families were no different. The damage had always been there. The storm simply forced everyone to see it. The following Friday, I woke before sunrise the way I often did after Harold passed away. Grief changed sleep. Some mornings it arrived like a heavy blanket. Other mornings it disappeared completely and left your thoughts pacing the house before dawn. I wrapped myself in my old cream-colored robe and walked barefoot into the kitchen. The clock above the stove read 5:17. Outside, the neighborhood sat still beneath pale blue morning light. For years, this hour belonged to Harold. He would make coffee too strong, hum old jazz songs terribly off-key, and read the newspaper like the fate of the nation depended on it. I missed ordinary things about him more than the big ones now. The sound of his boots near the back door. The way he always forgot where he left his reading glasses. The quiet certainty of being loved without needing to earn it every day. I poured myself coffee and sat near the window overlooking the backyard. The garden needed trimming again. Harold would never have allowed those tomato vines to lean sideways like that. He believed neglected things eventually collapsed under their own weight. Families too, probably. Around 7:30, there was a knock at the front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Daniel stood there holding a cardboard tray with 2 coffees and a paper bag from the bakery downtown. He looked tired. Not dramatic tired. Not one bad night of sleep tired. Soul tired. The kind that settled into a man after too many years of avoiding difficult truths. "Morning," he said quietly. "I brought cinnamon rolls." I stepped aside without speaking and let him enter. Some wounds needed less conversation and more consistency. He placed the bag on the kitchen counter carefully. "I remembered these were your favorite." "They were your father's favorite," I corrected gently. "You used to steal the frosting off the top when you were little." A faint smile appeared on his face for half a second before disappearing again. We sat together at the table in silence while steam rose from our coffee cups. It felt strangely familiar. Not comfortable exactly. But familiar enough to remind me that beneath all the disappointment, this was still my son. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Vanessa moved in with her sister for a few days." I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I see. Things have been bad." There it was again. Passive language. Things have been bad. As if marriages collapsed by weather instead of choices. "Daniel," I said carefully, "you do not have to protect me from the truth anymore." He stared down at the table. "She is angry that people are treating her differently. People usually do after they hear honesty for the first time." He exhaled slowly. "I think she really believed the house would eventually belong to us." "No," I corrected softly. "She believed it belonged to her already." That silence lingered between us a while. Then Daniel surprised me. "I should have stopped it years ago." I looked at him carefully. "Why did you not?" His eyes shifted toward the window. "Because confronting her always became exhausting. She would cry or blame someone else or tell me I was choosing you over my own wife." He paused. After a while, it just felt easier to stay quiet. I nodded slowly. There it was. The truth most families never admitted out loud. Silence was not peace. Silence was surrender wearing polite clothes. "And every time you stayed quiet," I said gently, "she learned the behavior would continue without consequences." He rubbed his forehead tiredly. "I know that now." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me differently. More honestly. "Did Dad know?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "Know what?" How bad it had gotten. My chest tightened slightly at Harold's name. "Your father noticed more than people realized." Daniel swallowed hard. "Did he say anything?" I stared at the steam curling from my coffee cup. "About 6 months before he died, he told me something while we were sitting on the porch." I could still hear Harold's voice clearly. Calm. Certain. He said, "Margaret, one day you are going to have to stop confusing tolerance with love." Daniel looked away immediately. Shame moved across his face like shadow. "I failed him," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "You failed yourself first." That one settled deep between us. Around 9 o'clock, Emma arrived unexpectedly. The moment she stepped into the kitchen, the tension shifted slightly. She hugged me tightly without hesitation. Teenagers usually became awkward about affection eventually. Emma never had. "Grandma, your roses are blooming again," she announced while peeking toward the backyard. "They survived another winter somehow." "Strong roots," I replied. She smiled faintly before noticing her father sitting quietly at the table. "Are you two okay?" Children always sensed emotional weather faster than adults admitted. Daniel nodded. "We are trying." Emma sat beside me and reached for a cinnamon roll. "Mom says everybody is judging her." Daniel closed his eyes briefly like a man already exhausted by repeated conversations. But I answered calmly. "Sometimes being judged feels uncomfortable because deep down we know people finally see us accurately." Emma looked thoughtful at that. "Wise girl." Harold used to say intelligence skipped generations in strange ways. For the next hour, we talked about ordinary things. School. Emma's art class. The diner reopening downtown after renovations. Weather. Simple conversation felt precious now. Families underestimated ordinary peace until chaos stole it away. Before leaving, Emma helped me water the plants on the porch. As she adjusted the hose nozzle, she glanced toward me carefully. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are you still mad at Dad?" Children always asked the question adults avoided. I considered my answer carefully. "I am disappointed in him," I admitted. "But disappointment and love can exist together." She looked relieved hearing that. "I think he is trying." I watched Daniel through the kitchen window while he rinsed coffee cups at the sink. His shoulders looked heavier than I had ever seen them. "I think so too," I said quietly. After they left, the house became silent again. But it no longer felt lonely. That surprised me most. 4 months after Harold died, silence felt like abandonment. Now it felt different. Cleaner somehow. Honest. I spent the afternoon sorting old photographs in the hallway closet. Decades of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings, school recitals. In one photo, Daniel stood beside Harold holding a fishing pole twice his size, grinning with missing front teeth and sunburned cheeks. Another showed Vanessa at Thanksgiving years ago, smiling brightly beside me in my kitchen before bitterness hardened her face into something colder over time. Looking at those pictures, I realized something painful. Families rarely broke all at once. They cracked slowly through tiny tolerated moments. Disrespect ignored. Boundaries excused. Kindness taken for granted until resentment replaced gratitude completely. By evening, golden sunlight stretched across the living room floor while I placed the photographs carefully back into their boxes. One picture remained in my hands longer than the others. Harold sitting on the porch swing, smiling toward me behind the camera. Calm. Steady. Safe. On the back, written in his crooked handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Do not disappear for anybody." I sat there staring at those words while the house settled softly around me. And for the first time in years, I realized I finally had stopped disappearing. 2 weeks passed before I saw Vanessa again. Long enough for the neighborhood gossip to cool down. Long enough for people at church to stop pretending they needed extra napkins from my table just to overhear conversations. Long enough for silence to settle into the spaces where tension used to scream. During those weeks, Daniel visited more often. Not dramatically. Not with emotional speeches or desperate apologies. Just quietly. He fixed the loose porch step Harold kept meaning to repair before he got sick. He changed the burned-out kitchen light without being asked. One afternoon he even trimmed the hedges along the driveway while I sat on the porch shelling peas into a metal bowl. There was something almost heartbreaking about watching your grown child slowly remember how to care for someone without expecting praise for it. Around the 3rd Saturday of that month, Emma convinced me to attend her school art showcase downtown. I almost said no at first. Crowds exhausted me lately. But that girl inherited Harold's persistence. "Grandma," she said over the phone, "you cannot miss the best painting I have ever done." So there I was at 6:30 in the evening standing inside the high school gymnasium surrounded by folding tables, nervous teenagers, and parents pretending not to compete with each other through forced smiles and expensive shoes. Emma spotted me immediately and waved both arms dramatically from across the room. "You came," she shouted. "Of course I came," I answered, laughing softly. "You act surprised every time." She hugged me tightly before pulling me toward the display wall. "Mine is over here." The painting stopped me cold for a moment. It showed an older woman standing alone in a garden at sunset. Her silver hair moved gently in the wind while flowers bloomed wildly around her. There was no sadness in the woman's face. Just strength. Quiet strength. "Emma," I whispered, "this is beautiful." She smiled shyly. "It is called starting again." My throat tightened unexpectedly. That child saw more than adults realized. "Tell me about it," I said softly. Emma glanced toward the painting before answering. "It is about how people think older women disappear after a certain age. But really, sometimes they just stop pretending." I stared at her for several seconds. Harold would have adored that sentence. Before I could respond, another voice interrupted from behind us. "It is certainly dramatic." "Vanessa." I turned slowly. She stood there wearing a pale blue blazer and the same polished expression she used whenever she wanted strangers to mistake appearance for character. But something about her looked different now. Less certain. The confidence still existed, but cracks showed underneath it. Emma's body stiffened beside me immediately. Children recognized emotional danger faster than adults gave them credit for. "Hi, Mom," Emma said carefully. Vanessa nodded once before looking directly at me. "Margaret." No warmth. No apology. Just formality sharpened into distance. "Vanessa," I replied calmly. For one awkward moment, all three of us stood there pretending normalcy still existed. Then Emma quietly excused herself to speak with her art teacher, leaving Vanessa and me alone beside the painting. Vanessa crossed her arms lightly. "She painted you, you know." I noticed. "She barely paints me anymore." There was bitterness in her voice, but underneath it I heard something else too. Hurt. Real hurt. It would have been easier if Vanessa were simply cruel. But people were rarely that simple. "Children move toward safety," I said gently. Her jaw tightened instantly. "So now I am unsafe? Emotionally?" I asked calmly. "Sometimes, yes." She looked away toward the crowded gymnasium. "Daniel barely talks to me lately unless it is about Emma." I stayed quiet. Not every silence needed rescuing. "I did not think things would spiral this far," she admitted finally. That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her in years. "Neither did I," I replied. Vanessa let out a slow breath before speaking again. "You know what the worst part is?" I waited. "Everyone looks at me differently now." There it was again. Reputation. Perception. Image. Vanessa always cared deeply about how she appeared to others. More deeply, perhaps, than how she actually behaved. "That feeling passes eventually," I said. "If the behavior changes too." She gave a short humorless laugh. "You really think I am the villain here?" I studied her face carefully. For the first time since I had known her, she looked tired of performing. "No," I answered honestly. "I think you became so focused on winning control that you stopped noticing the damage you caused along the way." Her eyes flickered slightly at that. Not anger this time. Recognition. Small, but there. "I never hated you," she said suddenly. That surprised me enough to remain silent. Vanessa swallowed carefully before continuing. I think I resented how much Daniel needed your approval." Ah. There it was. The deeper wound beneath all the entitlement and manipulation. Insecurity. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "a son loving his mother does not reduce his ability to love his wife." She looked down at the polished gym floor. It felt like competition sometimes. Because you treated love like something scarce. She did not argue with that. Across the room, applause suddenly erupted as students gathered near the stage for scholarship announcements. Emma waved excitedly for us to come closer. Vanessa hesitated beside me for half a second. Then we walked together through the crowd in strained silence. During the ceremony, Emma received honorable mention for her painting. Her face glowed with pride while holding the certificate in trembling hands. I clapped until my palms hurt. Vanessa cried quietly beside me. Real tears this time. Not strategic ones. Afterward, we stood outside near the parking lot while warm evening air drifted through the trees. Emma ran ahead toward Daniel's truck, talking nonstop about colors and judges and college applications. Vanessa watched her for a long moment before speaking softly. She is pulling away from me. Then stop pulling against her, I answered gently. Vanessa looked at me carefully. Do you really think people can change? The question lingered between us beneath the yellow glow of parking lot lights. I thought about Harold. About grief. About pride. About all the years people wasted protecting their egos instead of their relationships. I think people change only when protecting their old behavior becomes more painful than facing the truth, I said finally. Vanessa nodded slowly, almost to herself. Before leaving, she surprised me again. The painting suits you, she said quietly. The woman in the garden. I looked toward Emma laughing beside her father under the streetlights. Maybe, I replied softly. Vanessa opened her car door, then paused. For what it is worth, she said without meeting my eyes, I did love Harold. My chest tightened unexpectedly at his name. I know, I answered. And for the first time in many years, the conversation ended without either of us trying to win. By early October, the air had started turning crisp in the mornings. The maple trees lining our street glowed deep orange and red, scattering leaves across sidewalks Harold used to insist on raking every Saturday before breakfast. I still caught myself looking out the front window expecting to see him there in his old denim jacket, arguing with the wind like it was a personal enemy. Grief softened over time, but it never truly disappeared. It simply learned how to sit quietly beside your daily life without interrupting every moment. Things between Daniel and Vanessa had settled into an uneasy distance. They were still living together again, but Emma told me the house felt different now. Quieter. Careful. Like everyone inside, it was afraid one wrong sentence could reopen wounds barely stitched closed. I understood that feeling better than she realized. Some families survived conflict by healing. Others survived by avoiding honesty until silence became permanent. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly carrying a cardboard box filled with old paperwork from his garage. I found some of Dad's things, he said while setting it carefully on the dining room table. I opened the box slowly. Tax records. Instruction manuals Harold refused to throw away. Old photographs. Receipts from hardware stores dated 20 years ago. Men like Harold saved everything except their emotions. At the bottom sat a small leather notebook I had never seen before. Daniel noticed my expression immediately. I think it was Dad's journal. My fingers hesitated slightly before opening it. Harold was not the type to keep diaries. He believed feelings should be handled privately and practical problems should be solved before dinner. But as I flipped through the worn pages, I realized this was not a diary. It was notes. Thoughts. Fragments of observations written late at night in Harold's uneven handwriting. Grocery reminders mixed beside reflections about life. Quotes from books beside reminders to replace the water heater. Ordinary and profound sitting side by side the way marriage often did. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter while I turned pages carefully. Then I stopped suddenly. One entry near the center caught my eye. Margaret keeps shrinking herself to keep peace. One day she will realize peace built on disrespect is only loneliness wearing a family disguise. My chest tightened instantly. Daniel noticed my face change. What did he write? I handed him the notebook without speaking. He read the entry slowly. The silence afterward felt heavier than words. He knew, Daniel whispered. Yes, I answered softly. He always knew. Daniel sat down heavily at the table. Why did he never say anything to me? I closed the notebook gently before answering. Because your father understood something painful about people. They usually do not hear truth until life forces them to. He stared down at the table for a long moment. I keep thinking about all the times you looked uncomfortable and I ignored it. I watched him carefully. There was no defensiveness left in him now. Only regret. Real regret changed people differently than guilt. Guilt wanted relief. Regret wanted growth. You cannot rewrite those years, I said gently. But you can decide who you become after them. He nodded slowly. Vanessa has been trying lately. That surprised me less than it once would have. Pain humbled people eventually if pride stopped interrupting the lesson. Trying how? I asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair. She started therapy. Well. That explained the quieter eyes. She apologized to Emma last week too. For what? For making her feel caught in the middle. I sat quietly absorbing that. Accountability sounded strange coming from Vanessa, but not impossible anymore. Sometimes losing control forced people to confront themselves honestly for the first time. Do you believe her? I asked carefully. Daniel thought for several seconds before answering. I think she is finally scared enough to tell the truth. That answer felt more honest than romantic. Around 5 o'clock, Emma arrived after school carrying 2 grocery bags and enough energy to fill the entire house. Grandma, Mom sent soup, she announced dramatically while placing containers on the counter. And before you ask, yes, she made it herself. Nobody purchased it from a fancy organic store pretending it was homemade. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. Even Daniel smiled. Emma lowered her voice conspiratorially. She also practiced the recipe twice because the first version tasted like salted dishwater. Emma, Daniel warned gently, trying not to laugh himself. What? She said innocently. I am supporting honesty in this family now. Harold would have adored her sense of humor. We ate dinner together that evening. Simple vegetable soup, warm bread, iced tea. Nothing fancy. But somewhere between Emma talking about college applications and Daniel arguing about football scores, the house briefly felt alive again. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real. After dinner, Emma wandered into the living room carrying the leather notebook. Can I read some? She asked carefully. I hesitated only a second before nodding. She curled into Harold's old armchair and flipped through pages quietly while Daniel washed dishes in the kitchen. Suddenly Emma laughed softly. Listen to this one. She cleared her throat dramatically. If Daniel buys one more broken motorcycle to repair in my garage, I may bury him under the azalea bushes myself. I burst into laughter immediately. That sounds exactly like your grandfather. Daniel groaned from the kitchen. He loved exaggerating. Emma kept flipping pages until her expression changed slightly. Oh, she said quietly. This one is about Grandma. I looked up slowly. What does it say? Emma read carefully. Margaret believes love means enduring everything quietly. I hope someday she understands that love should feel safe enough to speak honestly inside. The room fell silent after that. Even the running water in the kitchen stopped. My eyes burned unexpectedly, but I smiled anyway. Your grandfather always noticed more than people realized. Emma closed the notebook gently against her chest. He really loved you. Yes, I whispered. He really did. Later that night after Daniel and Emma left, I sat alone on the back porch wrapped in a thick sweater while cold autumn wind moved through the trees. The neighborhood glowed softly beneath porch lights and distant television flickers behind curtains. Somewhere nearby, someone burned firewood. The smell carried memories of old Thanksgiving evenings when the house overflowed with noise, dishes, laughter, and temporary happiness nobody appreciated enough at the time. I thought about Vanessa then. About fear. About insecurity. About the strange ways people wounded others while trying desperately to protect themselves from imagined rejection. None of it excused her behavior. But understanding pain and accepting mistreatment were not the same thing. That was something I finally understood now. The porch swing creaked gently beneath me while I stared out toward Harold's garden resting beneath the October moonlight. For years I believed strength meant endurance. Stay quiet. Stay kind. Stay available. Absorb disappointment gracefully. But maybe real strength looked different. Maybe real strength meant refusing to disappear just because other people felt more comfortable when you were smaller. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind moving softly through the trees Harold planted decades ago. Strong roots, I thought again. Strong roots survive difficult seasons. November arrived quietly, carrying cold mornings and early sunsets that turned the windows gold by 4 in the afternoon. The grocery stores filled with canned pumpkin displays and artificial cinnamon scents, while every commercial on television suddenly became about gratitude, family, and togetherness. Funny how holidays always advertised perfect relationships to people still trying to survive real ones. I spent most mornings preparing the house for winter. Pulling blankets from storage. Cleaning out kitchen cabinets. Replacing old weather strips near the back door Harold always forgot to fix properly. Life felt steadier now. Not happier exactly. But steadier. There was dignity in steadiness after emotional chaos. Daniel continued visiting every week. Sometimes with Emma. Occasionally alone. The conversations between us had changed too. Less careful. More honest. We no longer danced around difficult truths pretending silence counted as healing. One Wednesday afternoon, while helping me carry firewood from the garage, Daniel suddenly said, "Vanessa wants to come to Thanksgiving." I paused with a bundle of logs in my arms. I assumed she would. He looked uncomfortable immediately. "Only if you are okay with it." I almost smiled. There it was again. My son finally learning that consideration should happen before decisions, not after consequences. "This house has always welcomed family," I answered calmly. "The question is whether people know how to behave like family once they enter it." Daniel nodded slowly. "She is trying, Mom." "Trying is good," I replied gently. "Consistency matters more." He did not argue. Later that evening, Emma called while working on homework. "Grandma," she announced dramatically, "Mom has watched 6 Thanksgiving cooking videos this week and nearly cried over gravy yesterday." I laughed softly. "Gravy humbles many people." "You do not understand," Emma continued. "Dad offered to purchase pre-made pies and she looked personally insulted." "Well," I said carefully, "sometimes people want to prove they can still contribute something meaningful after realizing they have damaged trust." Emma went quiet for a second. "Do you think she means it?" Children always ask the questions adults tiptoed around. "I think your mother is finally beginning to understand that respect cannot be demanded after kindness is exhausted," I answered honestly. The truth was, I did not know what Thanksgiving would look like this year. The old version of our family no longer existed. Too much had been exposed. Too many illusions stripped away. But maybe honesty created room for something healthier eventually. Smaller perhaps. Less polished. But healthier. The week before Thanksgiving, Vanessa came to the house alone for the first time in months. I opened the front door expecting tension, but instead found her standing there clutching a foil-covered casserole dish like a nervous teenager meeting future in-laws for the first time. "I made sweet potatoes," she said awkwardly. "I know it is not Thanksgiving yet. I just wanted to practice." For one brief moment, I saw exactly who she used to be before bitterness sharpened her edges. Not cruel. Just insecure. Desperate to feel chosen. "Come inside," I said quietly. She stepped carefully into the house, glancing around almost like she had forgotten what peace felt like there. I led her into the kitchen while she placed the casserole dish on the counter. "Emma says your roses survived the frost," she said after a moment. "Barely," I replied. "Strong roots help." Something flickered across her face at those words. Recognition maybe. Or regret. I reheated coffee while Vanessa stood awkwardly near the table twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Finally she spoke. "I owe you an apology." I stayed quiet. Not cold. Just listening. A real one this time. She swallowed hard before continuing. "I spent years competing with you without admitting that is what I was doing." Her voice shook slightly now. "And when Harold died, I think part of me assumed your place in the family would become smaller somehow." Honesty sounded strange coming from her. Raw. Uneven. Real. Instead, she whispered, "I became uglier." I handed her a mug of coffee carefully. "Pain reveals character," I said softly. "Sometimes it also reveals fear." She nodded slowly while staring into her cup. "I was afraid Daniel would always choose you emotionally over me. And so you tried controlling the relationship instead of strengthening your own." Vanessa looked up sharply. "Yes." We sat in silence for several seconds before she laughed bitterly at herself. "God, I sound pathetic saying it out loud." "No," I replied calmly. "You sound honest for once." That landed quietly between us. The kitchen felt different now than it had months earlier. No performance. No hidden insults wrapped inside politeness. Just two tired women finally speaking truth without trying to win. "I cannot undo what I said at that dinner," Vanessa admitted. "No," I agreed. "You cannot." She looked down immediately, but I continued gently. "But accountability matters. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding it." Her eyes filled slightly with tears she clearly hated showing. "I did love Harold," she whispered again. "I know. And I know he would be disappointed in me." I thought about Harold then. His quiet wisdom. His stubborn sense of fairness. The way he believed people should always leave room for redemption without becoming fools about trust. "Your problem was never that you lacked love," I said carefully. "Your problem was that you let insecurity poison it." Vanessa covered her eyes briefly with one hand. "I do not know how to fix this." "You do not fix relationships through speeches," I answered softly. "You fix them through patterns. Through consistency. Through humility repeated long enough that people feel safe believing it." She sat quietly absorbing that while late afternoon sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor between us. Finally she asked the question I think terrified her most. "Do you think you will ever trust me again?" I considered her carefully before answering. "Trust returns slowly. But respect for honesty begins immediately." Vanessa nodded once, tears slipping silently down her cheeks now. Not dramatic tears. Just exhausted ones. Before leaving, she stopped near the front door awkwardly. "The sweet potatoes probably need more brown sugar," she admitted quietly. I laughed despite myself. "That can be fixed easier than family." For the first time in years, Vanessa smiled at me without calculation behind it. Small. Uncertain. Human. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the casserole dish still resting on the counter. Outside, cold wind moved through the trees while evening settled softly across the neighborhood. I realized then that forgiveness did not always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrived quietly through small moments of truth spoken without defense. It did not erase damage. It did not restore innocence. But it created the possibility of something honest growing where performance used to live. And maybe, after everything that happened, honesty was the closest thing our family had left to hope. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright, with thin frost clinging to the edges of the porch railing and the smell of cinnamon already drifting through my kitchen before 8 o'clock. For years, I treated holidays like performances. Every dish timed perfectly. Every table setting arranged carefully. Every uncomfortable emotion buried beneath pie crust and polite conversation. But this year felt different before anyone even arrived. Simpler somehow. More honest. I stood at the counter rolling biscuit dough while old jazz music played softly from the radio Harold used to fix with unnecessary determination every winter. The turkey rested in the oven. Green beans waited beside the stove. 2 pumpkin pies cooled near the window. And right in the center of the counter sat Vanessa's sweet potato casserole from the practice visit earlier that week. She had dropped off a new version yesterday with a quiet little note attached. Less salt this time. Progress. I smiled every time I thought about it. Around 10:30, Daniel and Emma arrived carrying folding chairs and grocery bags. Emma burst through the door first wrapped in a thick cream sweater and enough excitement to power the entire neighborhood. Grandma, Dad almost forgot the cranberry sauce and Mom nearly declared emotional war in the parking lot. Daniel sighed heavily behind her. I forgot one item. It was Thanksgiving cranberry sauce, Emma corrected dramatically. That is not one item. That is tradition. I laughed softly while Daniel kissed my cheek. Morning, Mom. Good morning, sweetheart. That word felt natural again lately. Sweetheart. Not forced forgiveness. Not denial. Just affection rebuilding itself slowly through consistency. Where is Vanessa? I asked carefully. Daniel glanced toward the driveway. Sitting in the car pretending she is not nervous. Before I could answer, Emma spun around immediately. I will go get her before she drives herself into another emotional crisis. Teenagers should not have been that funny. A few moments later, Vanessa entered carrying a covered glass dish and enough visible anxiety to tighten the entire room for half a second. Then something surprising happened. Instead of pretending confidence, she simply looked at me honestly. Happy Thanksgiving, Margaret. Happy Thanksgiving, Vanessa. No performance. No fake warmth. Just truth spoken gently. That alone felt like progress. The morning passed busily. Daniel set up extra chairs while football played quietly in the living room. Emma arranged napkins into shapes nobody understood but everyone praised anyway. Vanessa helped me in the kitchen without taking over the space the way she used to. That difference mattered more than she realized. At one point while we stood side by side mashing potatoes, she paused awkwardly before speaking. I used to hate how comfortable you were in here. I looked up from the stove. In my own kitchen? A faint embarrassed smile crossed her face. I know how ridiculous that sounds now. No, I replied calmly. It sounds insecure. She nodded immediately. Exactly. Then quieter, I always felt like I was visiting a family that already existed before me. I stirred the gravy slowly before answering. You were never supposed to replace anyone, Vanessa. She looked down at the counter. I think part of me believed I had to. That sadness hit differently now. Months ago I would have heard manipulation hidden beneath it. Today I heard exhaustion. Real emotional exhaustion from years spent competing in battles nobody else realized existed. Around noon, more relatives arrived. My sister Diane from Phoenix. Cousin Richard and his wife Elaine from Tulsa. Even Lorraine wandered over carrying pecan pie and enough curiosity to qualify as investigative journalism. The house filled with noise quickly after that. Coats piled across beds. Laughter echoed through the hallway. Dishes clattered constantly. At one point I stood quietly near the dining room entrance just watching everyone move through the house Harold and I built together over 40 years. Families looked beautiful from a distance sometimes. Messy up close. But beautiful from a distance. Dinner itself felt almost strangely normal. Not perfect. Never perfect. But grounded. Real conversations instead of emotional landmines hidden beneath small talk. Emma dominated most discussions by describing her college art portfolio with dramatic hand gestures and complete confidence. Harold would have loved seeing that. Halfway through the meal, Lorraine complimented the sweet potato casserole loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "Vanessa, this is wonderful." Vanessa froze slightly beside Daniel like someone unused to receiving kindness without suspicion. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then after a pause, "Margaret helped me fix the recipe." That caught my attention immediately. Months ago, Vanessa would have taken credit instinctively. Tiny changes revealed bigger transformations sometimes. After dinner, while everyone moved into the living room carrying pie plates and coffee cups, Emma suddenly disappeared upstairs. A few minutes later she returned holding Harold's leather notebook against her chest. "I want to read something," she announced nervously. The room grew quiet immediately. Daniel looked surprised. Vanessa looked terrified. Emma opened the notebook carefully. "Grandpa wrote this about family." Her voice softened while reading. "Families survive mistakes when pride does not become more important than love. But love without honesty becomes performance eventually." Nobody spoke after she finished. The silence felt emotional but not painful. Just honest. Emma looked around nervously. "Too much?" "No," I whispered softly. "Not too much." Vanessa stared down at her hands for several long seconds before suddenly speaking. "I owe everyone here an apology." The room shifted instantly. Diane stopped reaching for pie. Lorraine nearly stopped breathing entirely. Vanessa looked directly at me first. "Especially you." Her voice trembled now, but she continued anyway. "I spent years resenting kindness because I interpreted it as judgment." She swallowed hard. "And I punished people for insecurities I never admitted out loud." Daniel reached slowly for her hand, but Vanessa kept speaking before he could rescue her emotionally. "What I said at that dinner was cruel. Not because I was angry. Because I wanted control." The honesty in that room felt almost physical. Heavy. Necessary. "I cannot undo it," she whispered. "But I am trying to become someone who would never say those things again." Nobody rushed to fill the silence afterward. That mattered. Real accountability required space to land properly. Finally, I set down my coffee cup and looked at her carefully. "Growth sounds different than excuses," I said softly. Vanessa's eyes filled immediately with tears she no longer seemed interested in hiding. "Thank you for giving me another chance to be here today." I considered her for a long moment before answering honestly. "Second chances only matter when people build something better with them." She nodded once, unable to speak around the emotion in her throat. Later that evening, after everyone left and the house finally quieted down again, I stood alone in the kitchen wrapping leftover pie while snow began falling softly outside the windows. The first snowfall of the season. Gentle. Silent. Transforming everything gradually without demanding attention. I thought about Harold then. About the notebook. About how close this family came to collapsing beneath years of unspoken resentment and emotional cowardice. But maybe survival did not always mean returning to what existed before damage happened. Maybe survival meant rebuilding something more truthful from the ruins of illusion. I turned off the kitchen light and glanced once more toward the dining room where laughter had filled the house only hours earlier. The wounds were still there. Some always would be. But for the first time in a very long while, nobody at that table had needed to shrink themselves just to belong.